Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Cindy Bernardo. I'm the treasurer for the eHop board here in Hopkinton. And I'm here today doing an interview with our town planner, John Gelcich. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And so today we're going to be talking about the MBTA Communities Act. And this is something that is going to be, somewhat of a hot topic, I guess, at town meeting. And we just wanted to let people know a little bit more about it before they get to town meeting, so they can be better informed ahead of time, do a little bit of research, get some answers to some of their questions. So thank you first for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Question for you, just to start off generally, what is the MBTA community? What is a community? What is the MBTA Communities Act?
Yep, so the act is something that the state has instituted that requires MBTA communities or communities designated as MBTA communities to adopt zoning that allows for multifamily by right in certain areas in town. And there are certain categories of MBTA communities. You could have a rapid transit community like the inner core communities, communities that are served by the commuter rail, and adjacent communities like Hopkinton.
Gotcha. And so what is it, they want us to then change our zoning, and what is it that they, which obviously would have to get passed by town meeting, what does it require? Like what is it that, as an adjacent community, what are the requirements that we would have to abide by?
Sure. So it's not necessarily changing zoning. The underlying zoning will remain. It's an overlay that gets put on top of that zoning. So developers or whoever owns the property would have different options to develop their land. They could develop it under the base zoning or the MBTA community zoning. And what it requires is a certain density, acreage of the town to be zoned as such, and then it allows for a certain number of units. So Hopkinton, being an adjacent community, has to have 50 acres zoned. It has to have the capacity for 750 units and an average of 15 units per acre.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot. So are there repercussions if we aren't able to fulfill all of that or able to comply to all of it?
So the bylaw that we have going before town meeting, we believe will comply with the law if adopted. We've had town council review it. It's currently before the state under the AG's office and the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities for a review for compliance. And so we assume, and we plan on having this be compliant when it goes to town meeting. So if it were adopted, we should be compliant. And if it is not adopted, then we would meet some restrictions and potential lawsuits from the state.
Okay. And so is this one of those types of questions at town meeting? Sometimes we have to do a 2/3, sometimes it has to be majority. Do you know what this one will be?
So zoning is usually 2/3.
Okay.
However, the state has made zoning bylaws that are part of the Housing Choice Initiative, which this is, a simple majority.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Okay. And so you had mentioned that there could be some penalties if we don't comply. Are there, monies that are attributable? That where would that, how would we get penalized financially, the town?
Sure. So there are 16 grants that if a town is non-compliant with the law would be ineligible for. Some of the bigger ones are the MassWorks grant, which we had gotten money for the downtown road improvements and Legacy Farms North. MVP, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grants, the Mass Downtown Initiative grants, and several other planning grants that are little ones and important for towns that we may not have taken advantage of in the past, but would potentially want to take advantage of in the future.
And then as well, too, are if some of these grant monies have already been in place but not completed yet, the projects associated with the grants have not been completed, it's also the possibility that we would lose that funding as well.
There is a potential to lose funding. Milton is currently in that process of being sued by the town or by the state for noncompliance, and I believe they are. Some of their funding is jeopardized. That has currently been awarded but not spent.
So if this does pass town meeting, is there a time frame when all of this has to be done by? Like, is it just as long as the zoning wording is approved at town meeting, we're done?
So there's a few more administrative things, but the whole package needs to be adopted by December 31st of this year. So if it's passed at town meeting, we have plenty of time to do the administrative things of getting it approved by the AG's office and filing whatever paperwork we need to.
Gotcha. And so you had mentioned that this is a zoning overlay. What does that mean just for the general public?
So you have your base zoning districts, your Residence A, your agricultural, your downtown business, and those are the districts that you see on a zoning map. You have some overlay districts that can be applied over those base zoning districts. So they're not the They're not the standard zoning that you see. They're just a separate opportunity to develop under. So the Osma district, where Legacy Farms is an overlay district. We don't have too many overlay districts in Hopkinton,
Yeah.
but it just would allow property owners to develop under 2 different districts depending on what they choose.
So it's the developer's choice.
It would be the property owner's choice.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay, that makes sense. And so I know this has come up through planning board and other committees and organizations in town. What areas of Hopkinton has any been identified? Have any been thought about that would be conducive to work in this situation?
So this originally started in the Zoning Advisory Committee. They generally look at potential zoning amendments before the planning board, and then they recommend certain proposals for the planning board to hold the hearings on and sponsor before town meeting. So this started in the Zoning Advisory Committee, or ZAC. They had about 9 meetings from June until when it was recommended to the planning board to discuss it. There was several properties all over town that have been discussed and deliberated, and then they narrowed it down to, I don't know the number of parcels, but 2 separate sub-districts, one of them being the Upper Cedar Street District and one of them being the Downtown District. The Upper Cedar Street District includes the property of Carbonis and the 2 adjacent residential lots, and then the property that houses the preserve. The Downtown is made up of a bunch of different lots that surround the Cedar Grove Main Street intersection.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So I think we have a map that we could potentially show the audience, and it kind of will help people visualize where those areas are. Now, as a lot of people with children in town think about these things, with that many more units and potential people coming in, is there any, I don't know how much can be done, but how much thought to the schools and the impact on our services here in town that have been, some of these committees have been talking about or thinking about?
Yep, absolutely. That's first and foremost on the planning board and Zach's mind when they talk about these things. There's really no way to definitively say what the impact is because we don't know the scale or timing of the developments that would come in. Like I said, it can be developed under the base zoning, which allows for much smaller developments. So people could use those properties for that, and a lot of these properties won't likely be developed in the near future because they already have developments on them.
Right.
So you'd have to tear down those buildings and build new. And in a lot of situations, it might not be worth it at this point in time. So we really don't know what the impact to schools will be, but generally, we think that the properties that have been identified will spread out the development. It won't happen all at once, and that the levels of development allowable right now and even possible right now, given infrastructure restrictions, is going to really limit the size of these developments in the initial part of it. And developers may elect not to develop at this point in time because of those limitations.
Okay, that makes sense then. Do you think, along with those lines, the impact of property values, right? Is that something that also has been considered? And
it's tough to consider property values because they're very subjective and they rely on myriad factors of interest rates and quality of the schools at that point in time and taxes and all that kind of stuff. The other thing that we always try and talk about is there is a premium that some people might pay to live near the train station where others might not pay a premium. And that's the subjective nature of property values. Is some people might think it will reduce their property values when others might want to pay a premium for that same amenity.
Correct. No, that's absolutely true because you're right there to get on the train line, right? So some people absolutely, you see it all along the commuter rail route. As you drive closer into town, into Boston, you'll just see more and more apartment buildings are going up and things like that. So it's definitely popular right now. Do you think, as far as, especially some of the areas that are closer, I would say, more by Carbonis, where there's wells and whatnot up in that area, is that something that is going to be considered? I'm sure it gets considered into with all the planning and the growth that these developers are going to have to consider. So
that's one of the limitations I was speaking about earlier, is that area does not have public water or sewer.
Right.
So any development will have to have a septic system and wells, so that would really limit how many units they can locate on those sites.
Right.
In terms of neighboring wells, this zoning bylaw doesn't change the regulations associated with water quality. So all of those same restrictions and requirements for any kind of development would still apply.
Excellent. Okay, that's good. Now, does the MBTA Communities Act, does it have any types of restrictions as far as the type of housing?
No, so it actually prohibits restricting based on age or any other factors.
Okay.
Yeah, so these are meant to be generally market rate. The Hopkinton proposal does have a provision for affordable units that is very similar to what is currently in our bylaw for the rest of town.
Okay.
There is a little quirk of, we tend to round up to the next affordable housing unit to get a little bit more, and we haven't gotten clear guidance from the state whether that's allowed. So there's a provision for, if the state doesn't allow this, to just allow for the round down to the nearest affordable
Gotcha.
housing unit.
But that's only really a difference of one,
Yes, yes.
I would
yeah,
imagine.
Right,
Okay.
yeah.
So when Zach and probably the planning board were considering different parts of town for this to be applicable to, what were some of those considerations, just for our viewers to have an understanding? Like, what made you think of those two areas?
So we had found some properties along South Street and other existing condos and larger developments around town, and those were kind of ruled out because they didn't have access to public transit. So with this, the ZAC and Planning Board were really trying to keep in the spirit of the law while also balancing the development potential. And so locating near transit,
Yeah.
locating downtown where you want foot traffic for local businesses and stuff like that was really what they were looking to do. And so Upper Cedar Street, walkable to the train station, has a current multifamily development nearby. Actually, one of the parcels is multifamily, and so it's nearby the train station. And then there's the MWRTA, the Metro West Regional Transit Authority bus line
Yeah.
that currently serves Main Street, that would serve downtown. And I've heard there are plans to have a north-south MWRTA bus route going from Littleton to Milford that would serve the Southborough train station and intersect with the existing Main Street line.
Yep.
So then you would have a direct connection from downtown to the train station via public transit.
Oh, that's nice. Wow. Excellent. Okay. And so does the building itself, whatever building structure this may take on, does it have any types of restrictions, like how tall it can be, or how the setbacks might have to be, or can it be in an historic area?
So there are dimensional requirements associated with it, and that's in the bylaw. They do have maximum height. I believe it's 40 feet, which is pretty consistent with what we have across town. There are setbacks. There are design guidelines that they need to follow. Zoning doesn't really interact with historic, so historic restrictions and regulations would still be in place.
Okay.
Zoning doesn't take that away. So if there was any developments within a historic district or historic property, those would remain. And yeah.
Okay. No, that works good. I guess then along those same lines, if it does, so the builders would still have to go through our regular typical processes of going through a design review or a potential historic review. Everything's still the same, a process.
So it's a by right multifamily, so they wouldn't need any special permits.
Okay.
They would need site plan. We have that in the bylaw, and the state allows for that. And design review gets to review projects through the site plan process, so that would remain intact.
Okay.
Historic, separate process, so that would remain. But it's a little different than a normal development would take because it would be by right, so there wouldn't be any special permits required.
Now, something along too, like, so if we are thinking about, I'm just thinking of the area downtown, parking, right? Like, that's something that would probably be a consideration if it's in that, downtown area. It's kind of tight, right, as far as where that is to be played, but that would be with any developer coming
Correct.
into that area. So there's no specific anything that needs to happen regarding that part of it.
Correct.
Okay. I think, we've had all our answers, questions being answered, so we appreciate that. We thank you for your time.
Yeah, happy to be here.
I just wanted to let anybody know in the audience that anybody has any additional questions that we didn't get to address here today. I know John said that he's willing to answer any of them by his email, which is great. We also have at eHop our email as well. Ours is questions@ehop.org, and John's is John Gelcich at hopkintonma.gov. We want to thank you for your
Yeah.
time today. And I don't know if you have any last
Yeah, I
words
just want to
add.
encourage anyone with any questions to feel
Yeah.
free to reach out to me. My email is jgelcich@hopkintonma.gov. Please, reach out to me by phone, by email, come visit my office. I'm happy to have a conversation, answer any questions that anyone has.
Excellent. eHop will be having our annual Know Your Vote. This will be, I'm sure, discussed there as well. That's going to be April 29th here at HCAM at 7 o'clock. And please, as always, come to town meeting because this will definitely be on there. May 6th, Monday, as well at the middle school. So thank you, John, for coming
Thank you.
today and answering our questions.
Thank you.